Hello. Welcome to my new channel. I'm Mitch. This is going to be a place where we talk about a lot of things from storytelling, art, video games, spirituality and religion, sci-fi. Seems like a whole jumble of things, but these are all things I'm really passionate about, things that I think are very closely interconnected. So this first episode is going to be about stories and human biology. I feel like it's really important to consider, like, why are we so into stories? When we have a free minute or when we're eating, we love to just like turn on a TV show and just watch something and get into the lives of these characters, whether it's a comedy show or a very intense drama. And I feel like at the very core of what makes our interest in stories so intense is the power of empathy. And I have a strong interest in empathy because I grew up in a religious environment where we, at the core of it was, at the core of like the religious scriptures was to like care for other people, don't be selfish, that kind of stuff. And it kind of like gave me the impression that, oh, like humans are naturally not like that. We have to be told to do that to act empathetic, like we're not naturally empathetic. But I'm like thinking, like, is that actually the case? Because perhaps something more core to human existence is really at the center of all this. All right, so let's talk about the evolution of empathy. We don't have the time to get into the nitty-gritty of how evolution works today, but generally speaking, it's impossible to do experiments on our evolutionary ancestors. Why? Because they don't exist as they did anymore. If they did, we wouldn't exist as humans, But we can do experiments on the next best thing. Chimps and bonobos, who are closely, very similar to our evolutionary ancestors. If these homies, these chimps and bonobos, displayed some sort of empathy through the experiments we did, then it might suggest that we also had evolved into being empathetic creatures. We didn't have to learn to be after we became humans, So one experiment I want to talk about is about these Rhesus monkeys that were given a chain. The monkeys could pull this chain and they'd get some food. But what happened when they pulled this chain is that it would shock a fellow monkey in their environment. And they would be able to see this monkey and they would be able to see the pain that the monkey suffered, What happened was the monkey that had the chain wouldn't pull the chain anymore because of the pain that they saw the other monkeys going through. They would rather starve themselves. I can't remember exactly how long, but they'd starve themselves for an extended period of time just so that they wouldn't have to hurt their fellow monkeys. So more evidence we have is from Nadia Coates, a Russian zoopsychologist who had a chimpanzee companion named Joni. So what Joni would do is he'd like escape the house sometimes, go on the roof, and just play around. And Nadia had a really hard time getting Joni to get off the roof. She would call to him. She would maybe offer treats or some kind of reward to lure him off the roof, but he wouldn't come off. But if she were to pretend to cry or to be in some kind of distress, Joni would immediately, come down. Not just when she was trying to get him off the roof, but also if she were to do that in the house and he was in the house, he'd immediately start scrambling to find Nadia and comfort her. Basically, she'd first like run around to make sure that whatever might be distressing Nadia wasn't giving her any trouble, and then he'd like go up to Nadia's face and go like softly touch it as a gesture of like, "Are you okay?" Another example of empathy in primates is there was this bonobo named Kuni, who basically in his zoo enclosure, he saw a bird that got wounded and fell to the ground, and he knew that birds, or actually it was a she knew that birds flew. She saw them flying in the sky all the time. So what she did was she picked up the wounded bird and climbed up a tree and threw it, as a way to help it fly. That didn't work, unfortunately, but after throwing it, she found the bird again, and she actually protected it for the rest of the day until the bird was able to fly on its own. Okay, so what does all this have to do with stories? What I believe is that we've evolved to interpret stories. Like, our brain is pretty much all about interpreting stories, and there's a reason for that. At every moment, there's 11 million different pieces of information going into our brain, from obviously what we're seeing and what we're hearing, but also like, what's my heart rate? Like, what's that itch on the back of my wrist? Like, how's my digestion going? Like, yada, yada, yada. There's 11 million pieces of information at any given moment that is going into your brain. And we do not have the ability to practically process that and make that do anything for us, you know. While we might not be consciously processing all that information, our brain is processing it behind the scenes. And that information creates instincts that allowed our human family way back when they were avoiding powerful predators. Their brains would process all this information and allow them to jump out of the way just in the nick of time, or know that something's up because there's a powerful predator about to eat them. So if we were dependent on only ever reacting to our conscious minds, we would be screwed, because by the time we think about jumping out of the way, we'd already been hit by the bus or the car, and we'd be dead. But what has evolved further was that if we were conscious of making decisions, we would even have a better chance of survival. So example, what if our ancestors found themselves in a situation where there's this predator coming, and they could have either, you know, climbed a tree to avoid it, or like hidden in a cave to avoid it. You know, they'll instinctually try to climb up the tree for whatever reason, to avoid the predator. And if they survive, they can go back and kind of re-simulate the story to themselves, or re-simulate the situation to themselves, and go like, oh, what if I had hidden in the tree and avoided the predator that way? What would that have mean? And then they can create this whole step-by-step sequence that turns into a story. And so what is happening here is that our brain, that has evolved to do this quite adequately, can create a hypothetical reality where they can basically re-experience it and basically figure out how they could have maybe prevented the whole situation in general. So to even multiply the impact of how storytelling in our conscious minds can help us survive, think about how the amount of experience we gain increases by multitudes as we communicate with other people that have other experiences. And by being able to live and simulate ourselves into their experiences, we'll even be more prepared for even more situations. Doesn't that sound like a great formula for survival? I mean, whenever we're reading or watching or playing through a story, we're actually experiencing it for ourselves, adding it to the log of experiences that our brain has already stored, so that we'll be ready if we ever get into a similar situation. That is the raw power of empathy. There's even neuroscientists that are doing studies on what are called mirror neurons. Our brains can really experience things without actually doing it ourselves. So what the study shows is that these chimps have neurons that will fire when they do something, like pick up a rock or something, but they also fire if they actually just see another chimp picking up a rock. The same exact neuron fires. And it just shows how our brain can create pathways and change just by watching another chimp do it or another person do it. In the case of stories, though, we're simulating an imagined character in our brains, but we're actually, you know, experiencing it just by watching them in our mental simulation, you know, and creating this vast possibility of different outcomes, you know. That's the power of imagination, you know. I know that in our current day and age, especially in the U.S., or those that are privileged in the U.S., we don't have to worry about survival as a life or death matter, but there are things that we've equated with survival, like when it comes to societal norms and like conforming to society, you know, there's things that because of the complexity of our brains, we've equated, you know, life and death situations with certain social situations or whatever. And those same goals, that same goal of survival, still holds true in those situations. That's why when we predict something in a plot and get it right, it's like the best thing in the world. What's happening here is that in our brain's mental simulation, the reward cycle of earning that new experience has been completed. And now you're better equipped in the future if you were to ever get into a similar situation like that. In other words, we're really kind of being tricked. Like, our brain is doing this without us really knowing. And we just enjoy it so much. It's pretty much the same as how we enjoy food or enjoy resting. And it's something that is ingrained in our minds. And there's a million more things to be said here, because if humans have evolved to be empathetic by default, then why has humanity seemed to stray so far from caring about each other? What if we are raw, super powerful, empathetic machines by default, and we've just used the same mechanisms in our brain to distance ourselves from people? They've kind of backfired in a sense because of the complexity of our brains, the complexity of society. Gosh, we are story consuming and story making machines, and this is something that's just hardwired into our brain. And there's a ton of other things to say about this, like, wait, how about sci-fi realities and fantasy realities that get created in books that we read and TV shows that we watch? Like, those realities are so far removed from our current reality, so how do those characters and those worlds give us experiences and complete the circuit in our brains? Well, I'm sure there's stuff to be said about that. There's a lot more to be said about this topic, so if you're intrigued, please hit the subscribe button and get on this journey with me, and we're going to learn a bunch more about this. Hope to catch you later.